Land and Justice is now called to order. Today is Tuesday, December 12th. The time is 8:04 a.m. Notices for this public hearing were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on Wednesday, December 4, 2019, and again on Tuesday, December 10. The notice was also published in Guam Daily Post on Wednesday, December 4, and Friday, December 6, 2019. There is one agenda item this morning, that is Bill number 141-35. It is the bill by Terlaje, Jose Pito Terlaje, an act to amend Section 61545 of Sub-Article 5, Article 5, Chapter 61, Division 2, Title 21, Guam Code Annotated, relative to violations involving sign regulations. I'd like to thank my colleagues for attending this morning, Senator Terlaje, Senator Kelly Marsh-Taitano, so we will now begin the public hearing and receive testimony. Before we hear from those who've signed up, and if you've signed up to testify, you may have a seat at this table, please, Mr. Murado. And we will hear from the senator, Senator Taitagui, who will introduce the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a Freudian slip. But I also would like to say this on a lighter note, that we've got the three T's sitting down here, Terlaje, Taitagui, and Taitano. And I'd like to also do a little bit of a shout out to Bernice, who may be watching. Well, she usually is, and I appreciate when the public does pay attention to what happens here during a public hearing or even an oversight hearing. And meeting Bernice last night, she's one of those who does tune in, and if she doesn't, she watches it on YouTube. So shout out to Bernice. But again, Huffaday, Madam Chair, and thank you for scheduling this public hearing on Bill 14135, relative to establishing penalties for a person or business that violates provisions of the signage law, specifically 61541, restrictions of use in residential, agriculture, commercial, and industrial zones. 61543, erections of signs, and 61544, signs in other than English or Chamorro language. Examples of regulations per section, Madam Chair, particularly on section 61541, restrictions of use in residential, agriculture, commercial, and industrial zones. Residential and agricultural zones, 61541A, section 1, one non-moving, non-flashing sign for each family residing on the premises indicating the name of the resident or pertaining to a permitted occupation, provided that each such sign does not exceed 3 square feet in an area. That's residential and agricultural zones. In commercial zones, section 61541B1C, individual signs shall not cover an area in excess of 10% of the surface of a wall which they are attached. In industrial zones, section 61541C2B, such structures shall not be placed closer than 10 feet to any street or highway right-of-way. Section 6154, erection of signs. A, all permitted signs shall be erected in such a manner as not to create a hazard to the public safety or property, and shall be resistant to wind, typhoon, earthquakes, or other natural phenomenons. Engineering design shall be based on applicable sections of Building Law of Guam Code. Also, there's section 61544, signs in other than English or Chamorro language. Signs in other than English or Chamorro language are permitted, signed, erected, displayed, or made pursuant to 61541 of this chapter, which contains a message in language other than English or Chamorro in Roman alphabet characters, shall contain a meaningful translation in English or Chamorro language, which shall be printed on the sign using Roman alphabetical characters. The Chamorro Language Commission shall assist in translating and approve all Chamorro translations required by this section for existing and new signs. The English or Chamorro translation must be predominant to the sign. So, Madam Chair, in all these sections here, Bill 141 proposes that a person or businesses who issued a notice of violation shall be given 30 days to remedy the issue. If the violation isn't addressed within the timeline, then the violator will be assessed $1,000. Moreover, Bill 141-25 Bill 141-35 proposes that a failure to pay fines, assessed, or multiple excessive violations may be reported by Department of Public Works and Department of Revenue Taxation to rescind or suspend the Department of Public Works clearance for sign owner's business license. However, the sign owner will not be subject to the $1,000 fine if the sign is temporarily moved for repair or compliance, and the sign to remount it after 30 days, provided that the sign is in compliance with the sign regulations. So, Madam Chair, as you know that in the fiscal note, if you happen to, I know you've looked at before, you've heard stories of DPW saying that they have approximately 27 sign violations going on. And if this is yearly done, then it's obvious that these business owners can probably afford the current penalty of $100. It's easier for them to afford that than having to comply to the sign regulations. And what Bill 141 provides that teeth that's needed. So, Madam Chair, Bill 141-35 was introduced prior to the recent passage of an enactment of Bill 86-35 as Public Law 35-52 relative to the exterior on-premises signs in Tumon Bay H Resort Zone, which includes penalties for sign violations specific to H zones. For reference, the newly established 21 GCA, Section 6151-54-1 F3 reads, 3. Violations. Any person in violation of subsection 61541 FF2 of Chapter 61, Title 21, Guam Code Annotated, shall pay a civil penalty not to exceed $1,000 for each violation. If the violations are not corrected within 10 business days of the receipt of the notice of violation by the Department of Public Works, such person shall be subject to an additional late action civil penalty not to exceed $300 per day for each remaining violation. Failure to pay penalties and to rectify the violations may result in a termination or a non-renewal of the digital sign permit. Department of Public Works shall have the authority to waive parts or all of the late action penalty should the violator demonstrate good faith efforts to address the violation in a timely manner, provided that such waiver is limited to no more than 30 calendar days. All penalties recovered in any such action shall be paid to the general fund. So, also, Madam Chair, I would like to work with your committee to include a number of technical amendments that were raised by legal counsel. As well, Madam Chair, I asked the committee to consider including an amendment to Bill 141, which would require the penalties collected pursuant to the recently passed H-zone signage law, Public Law 35-52, be deposited into the special fund that is proposed in Bill 141. This will ensure that DPW has the help it needs to enforce all signage laws for the zones. DPW is overextended with all its responsibilities, and I believe the special fund will strengthen its ability to protect irresponsible signage activity. Madam Chair, as you know, in the recent passage of the H-zone law, this penalty fund goes straight to the general fund. And I don't think that was the intention, and I ask Madam Chair that this be incorporated into Bill 141. And I thank you for in closing, Madam Speaker, I recognize the senators that past month established a fair set of penalties for violation involving signage for H-zone. I look forward to the comments and suggestions offered during this public hearing as the legislature works to improve public safety through Bill 141-35 by also protecting against irresponsible signage activity in our residents, agriculture, commercial, and industrial zones. Siduos Masi, Madam Chair, and Merry Christmas to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. For the record, invitations to this public hearing were sent to the Department of Public Works and the Guam Land Use Commission and other stakeholders. We will now accept testimony from those who've signed up. So Mr. Murado, you may begin. Welcome, and thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you, thank you. Good morning, Senators. Good morning, Senators. My name is Christopher Murado, and on behalf of my family, my partners, and our company, TriVision Media Group, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify before you this morning in support of Bill 141-35 with certain recommendations and amendments. TriVision Media Group is an outdoor advertising company that owns and operates the electronic displays at the Camacho property in front of the Coast 360 Bank in Tamuning, and the electronic display at the Pacific Bay Hotel in Tumon. I'd like to start by thanking and applauding the efforts of Senator Terlaje and her staff for taking on the challenge of revamping and modernizing our current sign laws, violation and penalty section. At this time, I'd like to mention a few of our ideas, concerns, and recommendations. On page 1, line 4, penalties, we recommend a change in verbiage, and I believe Senator Terlaje already mentioned a few amendments that she'd like to implement, and I think we're on the same page here, but I'll go ahead and read it through anyway. The verbiage that we recommend is any person or business who violates any provision of 61541, 61543, and 61544 of this chapter shall pay a civil penalty not to exceed $1,000 for each violation. If violations are not corrected within 10 business days of receipt of the notice of violation from the Department of Public Works, such person shall be subject to the additional late action civil penalty not to exceed $300 per day for each remaining violation. Failure to pay penalties and to rectify the violation may result in the termination or non-renewal of the digital sign permit. Multiple successive violations may be reported to the Department of Public Works reported by the Department of Public Works to the Department of Revenue and Taxation to restrict, rescind, or suspend the Department of Public Works clearance for the sign owners or businesses' business license. The Director of Public Works shall have the authority to waive parts or all of the late action penalties should the violator demonstrate a good faith effort to address the violation in a timely manner, provided that such waiver is limited to no more than 30 calendar days. All penalties recovered in any such action shall be paid into the Public Signage Enforcement Fund. The first change we recommend is that the $1,000 penalty be issued and due as soon as the notice of violation is assessed. The reason for this is that owners would have already known what is and what is not allowed when they go through the sign permit process. So at the point of receiving a notice of violation, they already knowingly violated the law and therefore should be penalized accordingly, right away, not in 30 days. I harpen it to kind of getting a speeding ticket. If a police officer pulls me over for speeding, he issues me a notice of violation, which is a speeding ticket, and I do not have 30 days to slow down. I have to pay that violation. I've already broken the law. Number 2, we also put a 10-day period in which violations have to be rectified. And the reason why we recommend a short period of 10 days, and mind me, it's not necessarily a short period. It is 10 business days, so that's 2 weeks. And the reason for this is that all signs out there, static signs as well as digital billboard signs or digital electronic signs, are very easy to repair. It's not very complicated. As TriVision, we've been doing this for over 15 years now. We contract a service company to repair our signs, and therefore our signs always look good. They don't have broken panels. Whenever a vandalism occurs, we take care of that right away. It's our responsibility. And if any property owner on Guam wants to install and operate either digital signs or static signs to advertise their companies to the mass public, they voluntarily take on the responsibility to maintain that display so as to look good for our entire community of Guam that, of course, boasts our beautiful island. Imagine a Guam with signs that are dilapidated, broken, electronic displays with down panels. That would really cause visual blight in our community. Also, these displays, especially the digital ones, are very easy to turn off if they notice a defective panel or section, or if they receive a notice of violation. There's no reason why it should take more than 10 business days, 2 weeks, to turn off a display or take down a static banner of some sort, or change a light bulb in a light box. It shouldn't take that long. Lastly, owners should have the ability to remove our third point here, and this speaks to the $300 per day fine after a 10-day period. The owners should have the ability to remove, disable, or power off displays within 10 days of the notice of violation in order for them to be able to fix it. And as long as the displays are powered off, disabled, or removed, then they should not be subject to an additional late action civil penalty of $300 a day. Now, the reason why we recommend that just turning off a digital display is more reasonable than removing one is that digital displays, like the ones that we own, aren't easily removed. You have to get an architect, an engineer to actually install these because of structural reinforcements, things like that. Most of these displays are very heavy, so you'd have to rent a crane, so on and so forth, to remove that display. So in order, and I've run into this many times, even just renting a crane sometimes takes 30 days out in order to rent a crane here on Guam. So, forcing a landowner to do it in 10 days might even be impossible for a landowner to take it down. But to shut off that display so that it doesn't look cheap, it doesn't look disheveled, I believe that that would be the right solution while they're repairing that display. And again, most repairs to these digital displays or static displays will not take 2 weeks. It just doesn't. We've been doing this for many, many years, over a decade. It's never taken us more than 3 days to repair any issue with our displays. Second point, Bill 14135 creates a special fund for signage penalties to be earmarked for future sign enforcement activities. We fully support this section. DPW desperately needs the funds to enforce these sign laws. We've been asking DPW to enforce current sign laws for over 15 years now. And the consistent reply we get every time we ask is that they don't have the funds or staff necessary to enforce these laws, and that they have more urgent priority issues to deal with other than sign violations. Having the funds to specifically enforce these sign laws will allow DPW to do so. So we truly support that. By the way, we've submitted packages to DPW before with photos of illegal signs throughout our island. These were fairly thick packages that we would give. We'd also give the violations that each one would do, but nothing would ever come of it, again, because of priorities of DPW, and I understand fundage, manpower, things of that nature. So creating a special fund would, I believe, would be really beneficial for our community. And I also, within the next 10 days, I'd like to submit a package with pictures and violations that'll help show the extent of illegal signs in our community. Lastly, we also recommend that both the sign owner and property owner be responsible for the signs, and therefore both should be issued a notice of violation instead of just the sign owner. There's several reasons for this. Number one, if a property owner knows that they are not getting penalized for illegal signage, yet still receive rental income from one sign owner, then they'd simply just advertise to rent to another sign owner to put up an illegal sign.
Could you repeat that point,
Sure.
please?
If a property owner is not penalized for violating the sign law, and the sign owner that he rents the property to is, that sign owner would then take down their sign, move off of the property, then the property owner can then rent the property to another sign owner that can put up another illegal sign. It's just a loophole that consistently will go on and on.
Are you suggesting that the sign owners also be penalized, not just, I mean, the property owners, not just the
Yes.
sign owners? Okay.
Not only the sign
All
owners,
right.
yes, both. The second reason for that is most encumbrances are attached to property owners. Mortgages, property taxes, GLUC variances, and also current sign permits are attached to the sign owner, to the property owner, not the sign owner. Third, the sign owner can come and go, but the property owner doesn't change often and has stronger incentive to follow the law because he does own that property and should be responsible for what's going on there. And lastly, the fourth point, all building permits need the permission of the landlord or owner of the property to acknowledge and sign. Permits for signs would be no different. Therefore, the owner needs to have the liability for allowing illegal action on their property. So that ends my testimony as I planned. There was one note that I kind of wanted to bring up, and this was something that we put together in our package, and we always state every time we submit it to DPW, is that part of the current law states that property owners or companies can put up signs, they can put up signs that are 10% of the wall on which it's mounted. Now, I'm not sure if we can do anything about that, but there's a lot of businesses and sign owners out there that convince DPW that the wall on which it's mounted is the entire surface of the building. And therefore, you'll see signs out there mounted on walls that literally cover the whole wall. But their calculation is it's 10% of the entire building surface, which I'm just a regular person. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like 10% of the wall on which it's mounted means the wall on which it's mounted, not necessarily the entire surface of the building. So I'm not sure if there's anything that we can do about that, but that's a loophole that a lot of companies and businesses use. And that ends my testimony today, and thank you again for your time and your efforts, Senator Taitigui. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murado. I appreciate your testimony, and I share your concern about the 10%. I intend to ask DPW or Guam Land Use Commission how many of these have variances versus just violations, and I'm not sure if there are many. But, and also that the property owners, I think the way the statute was written, the code, it looks like property owners are the ones who were liable throughout, so I want to make that consistent and that they are also liable. Are there any questions from the panel for Mr. Murado?
Siduos Masi, Mr. Morano, for coming out here. And you hit upon many of the issues that seem to be unclear to me or looked like they needed to be addressed. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness that you put in to your testimony. And it was very important to hear, especially if it looks like we're not going to have somebody from the Department of Public Works. I still want us to follow up with them, but it's important to hear about some of the experiences, especially if they're not here to testify about some of the issues that they come up with from their perspective. So with that, what I'll probably do is save my comments for what I'd like to have the Department of Public Works clarify, because like I said, I think you hit upon each of the ones that I was also questioning or wanting clarification on. So, Siduos Masi, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Taitigui?
Thank you so much, Chris, for being here this morning. Many of us look to you with your experience, the many years that you've been in this industry, and I feel that your testimony is spot on when it comes to, providing us the information, things that we don't see out there, that you see every day. I mean, we look to you for your expertise, and I greatly appreciate you being here early in this morning. As well, I share the same sentiments with my colleagues. I even made the effort to call DPW this morning, the director this morning, to ensure that he comes here, but unfortunately I wasn't able to get a hold of him. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to keep trying. I will keep trying. Your personal opinion on this, Chris, with regards to, I'm into running, I've been exercising. I love the marathon that's going on that PIC puts on. But do you feel that that long banner that is against their wall, from the top of the, 20 stories all the way down that they put down, is that in violation of the signage law, current signage law?
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer or a lawmaker, so I wouldn't really necessarily know. But as a citizen and knowing the law and the experiences that I have, I believe that is in violation. Number one, I do not believe that GVB is a tenant of the PIC hotel. Therefore, that is an off-premise advertising sign. Number two, obviously, it's bigger than 10% of the wall on which it's mounted. And then I believe number three, it's pointing the ocean. It's facing the ocean. So I think that's a new. It's included in the new sign law in Tumon. I'm not sure. I think so. But it can be seen from the ocean. So there's that also. But mainly, they're not a tenant of the building, and also it's bigger than 10% of the wall on which it's mounted.
I mean, that's where I was hoping DPW would come in and hear their interpretations, because I agree with what I'm reading. This is a big concern, and there's that loophole. I think it's time that we start closing those up to make it sure and factual to what we can and cannot do. Again, I greatly appreciate it. Wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas, and thank you so much for being here.
You too as well.
Okay.
Thank you. So according to the statute, again, the code that exists, it looks like to put up signs, you need to get a permit otherwise. And I know with the, with the permit, you should get rules, I suppose, and restrictions. But do you think that a lot of the violations that you've seen are landowners without permits for those signs, or they have permits and they're just in violation?
I would say about 95% of those signs out there do not have permits.
That's what I'm suspecting too.
Yes, and the ones that do have permits, again, like I testified earlier, they do justify it by saying the entire surface of the building instead of the wall in which it's mounted. So, not sure how to handle that.
We also just recently passed the electronic sign law for Hotel Zone in Tumon. So we would have to include that under this enforcement, or else I think it has its own enforcement provisions, similar to what you recommended here. Do you believe that the Guam Land Use Commission should continue to grant variances for signs so that building owners can exceed that 10% rule?
My personal opinion is that, and I've testified on behalf of this very question before, is that the JLUC or some body of the government should be able to vet these signs, especially if they're going to go outside of the current law, whether it be the new digital sign code or the current 40-year-old sign code. And the reason why I would rather the GLUC or a separate body evaluate each sign that comes up is because certain signs fit in certain locations. So if TriVision decided to build a really, really big sign somewhere that is within the law, but let's say it's allowed on commercial property, but that location is not necessarily conducive to a big sign, well, we're following the law. So we can just build it, and it might not look very good or anything like that. So we always were behind the fact that it should be vetted. So the community should be informed about it. The mayor should have a say in it. The public, there should be a public hearing so that residents can also state their concerns or support. So we've always believed that a vetting process should be allowed for or mandatory when it comes to these signs. So if GLUC is that vetting authority that the government decides should be, then we are in support of the GLUC doing that. Now, having said that, the GLUC, we would also recommend that they would have guidelines to follow instead of just having personal opinions to say yes or no. They should have some kind of guidelines. So yes, we do support that notion.
That GLUC continue to be allowed to grant variances as to size or other restrictions on the signs, or that GLUC should vet all signs?
We believe GLUC should vet signs that perhaps go beyond the extent of the law, that are conducive to the area in which they plan to build them. So anything that's within the law, I think should be fine. But anything outside of the law should be vetted and should have the opportunity for the public to see what the opportunities are and also what the negative effects could be. I truly support that. Yes.
Thank you. In regards to your submissions to DPW regarding sign violations, I want to thank you for doing all that work. And I want to just make a suggestion to you and to the public who might be listening that if there is any letter that you want the government to be aware of, one of the good avenues that I've seen is to send these letters to the Speaker of the Guam Legislature, because we have a process here in the legislature where every letter sent to the Speaker will become a permanent public record, and it becomes an archive for us. So years from now, people will see that at least one person in our community was caring enough about these sign laws to give testimony on it. Sending it to our committees is also good. It will become a permanent record, but it might be hidden under this bill, right? The committee report on this bill alone. So they'd have to find this bill, and it's a little bit more complex. But again, yeah, letters to the Speaker, they become permanent record, and they're also accessible to all of us at all times immediately. So that's just something that for the public to consider. I really appreciate the legislature over many years, their efforts to actually make these records permanent, because not all records are permanent. For example, letters sent to me don't necessarily become permanent, but my committee reports, of course, they do, but they're just more complex to go through. But anyways, that's just a suggestion for anyone. But again, Mr. Morado, I really thank you for your testimony today and your efforts in this regard. Tizus Masi. Anything else? Oh, sure. Yes, Senator Taitukui. Senator Taitino.
It's all those T's to keep keep straight. So in going through this, I wasn't able to reach out to the Department of Public Works in time or the GLUC to ask for what signage regulations they have in place. I'm assuming there's something in place. And Mr. Murati, so I do appreciate, because I was curious to what degree are sign violations an issue, and it sounds like there definitely are issues out there. And so that helps me evaluate moving forward on this bill. And it was also good to hear about your assessment of the number of days to fix this. I've heard some discussion that sometimes parts need to be ordered from off-island per se, and that 30 days might not be long enough in certain circumstances anyways. But if you feel that, or you assess that most issues are pretty easy to fix, but my recommendation would be, well, I think my recommendation has become to have the Department of Public Works develop rules and regulations based on, if this bill goes forward, that they develop a new set of rules and regulations so we can see these things. We can see that there's a sliding scale and understand what that sliding scale is for the penalties. Because what's in here, there were certain things that were mentioned that were picked out of each section, but part of the first section is about residences. Now, I did not know that at residences that we had a limitation to the size of the sign with our house number or our family name that we could place on our residence. So certainly I would want to be assured that no family with good intentions but not knowing that particular issue would receive a $1,000 fine and then a $300 penalty after that. So I'm assuming, but it's much better to see and know than assume about sliding scale. So I think it would be very good for us to be able to see what this sliding scale of fines would be. And so maybe that recommendation to have the Department of Public Works establish new rules and regulations for these new additional fines and situations so that we can truly evaluate what this bill means. So for the number of days, perhaps in that rules and regulations, they would have a process for extenuating circumstances. And so that would help make your recommendation of 10 days more manageable. That for most situations, 10 days may indeed be assessed as being manageable, but if there is indeed an extenuating circumstance, that can be accommodated if vetted and validated. And then, as was mentioned by one of the senators as well, understanding the difference between variances and sign offenses. So again, it'd be good for us to be understanding, if we're talking about a $1,000 fine, understanding if it's a small, perhaps, issue that's really more of a variance, if they should be getting close to the $1,000 fine, or if that's saved for the larger ones, and what does a larger offense mean versus a smaller offense. So I wanted to have some understandings on that. And I agree with you in that I think what you were pointing out is that it's the way that the bill's written right now, it's unclear whether this is a single time penalty or the ability for it to become a continuing penalty. So I think there needs to be some clarity there. And in the language after 30 days, I think there could be clarity there because at least in my reading of it, it seems like if you're going to take it down, you have to wait 30 days to put it back. And I don't necessarily think that's the intention, but yeah. So the last issue, and it's some of what you addressed, is that the Department of Public Works, and it's very important to hear that part of what they've been saying is they have shortage in personnel and they're not able to prioritize the time to address these signage issues. And yet all of you businesses out there are competing against each other in a sense based on signage to a degree. And so I think there could be clarity about where this money goes specifically, but the AG's office is also involved. So maybe there would be a formula so that we also know the AG's office, they just had several retirements and they are also short-staffed. But there could be some clarity to address some of the issues that you brought up that help them, help everybody by getting these sign issues addressed. But then to also be considering the AG's office and then whether the Guam Land Use Commission, whether they also need some support under this statute because they do issue sign variances, and so there may be some sort of support that they need to continue to strengthen this bill. So I think we were reading a lot of the same things, but your experience really helps make the difference in understanding this. And yeah, so that concludes the issues that I think that could be strengthened by having clarity, by adding in some sections or some language that allows us to get further feedback or understanding on the different elements in the bill.
Thank you, Senator Taitano. There being no additional individuals to present further testimony, this hearing is concluded. You may submit, or never mind. This public hearing is now adjourned. The time is 8:45 a.m. Situus Masi.